My name is Danielle Carter, and until recently, my life looked like a picture in a magazine. At 28, I had a loving husband, a cozy home filled with sunshine, and a twin sister who was my best friend. Mark, my husband, was a kind and supportive man. We'd been married for 5 years, and I honestly believed we were building a life together that was strong and unbreakable. We loved going on hikes, trying new restaurants, and just spending quiet evenings at home, reading or watching movies. Rachel, my twin, was always there too. We shared everything growing up: secrets, clothes, and dreams. Even as adults, we talked almost every day. She was working her way up at a big company downtown, and I was so proud of her. We were inseparable, two peas in a pod, or so everyone thought. People often said we were lucky to have each other, a built-in best friend for life. I believed it too. Our little world felt safe and predictable. Weekends were spent at family dinners, summer holidays meant trips to the beach, and birthdays were always a big celebration. Life wasn't perfect, of course. We had our little disagreements and bumps in the road, but nothing that ever felt too big to handle. I had a good job as a teacher at the local elementary school, shaping young minds and making a difference in my community. Everything seemed to fit together perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle. Looking back, I realized that maybe I was too comfortable, too trusting. Maybe I was blind to the cracks that were forming beneath the surface. I was so content with my life that I didn't see the storm brewing right in front of me, a storm that would shatter everything I thought I knew and leave me picking up the pieces. The day it all fell apart started like any other Tuesday. I woke up early, made Mark his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and packed his lunch. He kissed me goodbye, promising to be home early. Rachel was supposed to come over that evening for dinner. We were going to celebrate her recent promotion at work. I remember feeling a little extra happy that day, like something good was about to happen. Around lunchtime, I realized I'd forgotten to give Mark an important document he needed for a meeting. I decided to surprise him by bringing it to his office. It was only a short drive, and I knew he'd appreciate the gesture. I pictured his smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was genuinely happy. When I arrived at his office building, the receptionist told me he was in a meeting. Instead of calling him, I decided to wait in the lobby. After about half an hour, I started to get impatient. The meeting should have been over by then. I knew his office was on the 3rd floor, so I decided to take the stairs. I wanted to surprise him. As I approached his office door, I could hear muffled sounds coming from inside. At first, I thought he was on a conference call. But then I heard a giggle, a sound I knew all too well. It was Rachel. My heart skipped a beat. What was she doing here? Hesitantly, I pushed the door open. The scene that unfolded before my eyes is forever etched in my memory. Mark and Rachel were in each other's arms, tangled together on his office couch. The document I was holding slipped from my grasp and fell to the floor with a soft thud. The sound seemed deafening in the otherwise silent room. Time seemed to stop. The world tilted on its axis. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and heavy. I stared at them, unable to speak, unable to move. The look on their faces was a mixture of shock and guilt. It was a betrayal so profound, so complete, that it ripped through me like a knife. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Mark was the first to speak. His voice was a strangled whisper, "Danielle. We can explain." Explain? How could he explain this? Explain the betrayal that was twisting my insides into knots? Explain the pain that was stabbing at my heart with every beat? I couldn't speak. My throat was constricted, my lungs refusing to draw in air. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the already distorted scene before me. Rachel looked equally horrified, her face pale and drawn. She stammered, "Danny, it's not what you think." Not what I think. What else could it be? My husband and my sister, caught in a compromising embrace in his office. What other explanation could there possibly be? I finally found my voice, a shaky whisper that barely resembled my own. "Get away from him," I managed to choke out, my eyes fixed on Rachel. She scrambled off the couch, her eyes pleading. "Please, Danny, just let us talk." Talk? I didn't want to talk. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to break everything in sight. But I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by the shock and disbelief. I turned to Mark, my gaze filled with a pain I couldn't articulate. "How could you?" I whispered, the words laced with a venom I didn't know I possessed. "How could you do this to me? To us?" He looked down, shame etched on his face. "I don't know," he mumbled. "It just happened." "Happened?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "This didn't just happen, Mark. This is a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to betray me, to betray our marriage, to betray our family." I couldn't bear to look at them any longer. The sight of them together, the evidence of their deceit, was too much to handle. I turned and fled, running blindly out of the office, down the stairs, and out into the street. The world was spinning, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. I had to escape the pain, the betrayal, the shattering of my perfect life. I just ran. The days that followed were a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and endless replays of that horrific scene in my head. Mark called incessantly, leaving desperate voicemails begging for forgiveness. Rachel sent tearful texts, claiming she never meant for any of this to happen. Part of me wanted to believe them, to forgive them, to somehow salvage what was left of my life. But the other part, the wounded, betrayed part, screamed for revenge. And that part was growing louder every day. After a week of agonizing, I made a decision. I called Mark and agreed to meet him. I told him I needed to hear his explanation, to understand what had driven him to betray me. I also called Rachel and told her I was willing to talk, to try and work through this. When I met Mark, I put on the performance of my life. I acted heartbroken but understanding. I listened patiently as he stammered out his excuses, blaming it on stress, on loneliness, on anything but his own lack of character. I even shed a few well-placed tears, convincing him that I was considering giving him another chance. With Rachel, I was even more convincing. I played the role of the wounded sister, the forgiving friend. I told her I was hurt, but that I loved her and wanted to find a way to move forward. I asked her probing questions about her job, about her finances, about anything that might give me an edge. All the while, I was secretly gathering information, piecing together the puzzle of their deceit. I knew Mark had been struggling financially, that his business was on the verge of collapse. And I suspected Rachel was living beyond her means, flaunting expensive clothes and jewelry that her salary couldn't possibly afford. Underneath my facade of forgiveness, a plan was forming. A plan to make them pay for what they had done, to expose their lies and their betrayals. I would use their own secrets against them, turning their world upside down, just as they had done to me. My sweet act was just a mask, hiding a heart filled with ice and a mind set on revenge. They thought they had broken me, but they were wrong. They had just awakened a sleeping giant. My quest for evidence began subtly. With Mark, it was easier. I started by offering to help him with his business finances, feigning concern about his stress. He readily accepted, relieved that I was showing support. I spent hours poring over his company's bank statements, tax returns, and invoices. It didn't take long to find discrepancies, unreported income, inflated expenses, and outright lies on his tax forms. He'd been cooking the books for years, desperately trying to keep his failing business afloat. I meticulously copied every document, every transaction, building a solid case of tax fraud. Uncovering Rachel's secrets was more challenging. I knew she worked in the accounting department of a large corporation, so I couldn't just waltz in and start snooping around. Instead, I used our sisterly bond to my advantage. I started asking her about her work, feigning interest in the company's financial performance. I subtly guided the conversations towards internal controls and accounting procedures. One evening, over dinner, she casually mentioned a slush fund used for petty expenses. My ears perked up. I pressed her for details, pretending to be curious about how it worked. She, eager to impress me with her knowledge, unwittingly revealed that she had been skimming money from the fund for personal use. Small amounts at first, but gradually increasing over time. To get concrete proof, I knew I needed access to her computer. I concocted a story about needing her help with a spreadsheet for my teaching job. I asked if I could borrow her laptop for a few hours. She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, trusting that I wouldn't betray her. Once I had her laptop, I installed a keylogger, a small program that recorded every keystroke she made. I also searched her email for any incriminating evidence. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for: emails detailing the transfers of money from the slush fund to her personal account, along with forged invoices and falsified expense reports. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel had been systematically embezzling money from her employer for months. With both Mark and Rachel, I had gathered enough evidence to destroy them. The pieces were in place, and the game was about to begin. They had underestimated me, mistaking my kindness for weakness. They were about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. With the evidence in hand, the next step was to carefully orchestrate their downfall. I knew I couldn't act rashly. I had to be patient, methodical, and strategic. The timing had to be perfect. I decided to report Mark's tax fraud to the IRS. I anonymously mailed them copies of all the incriminating documents I had gathered, ensuring that they had everything they needed to launch a full-scale investigation. I also contacted Rachel's employer, providing them with the evidence of her embezzlement. I knew they would take swift action to protect their company's reputation. But the most crucial element of my plan was the timing. I wanted to maximize the impact of my revenge, to inflict the deepest possible wound. And then it hit me: our anniversary. The day Mark and I had vowed to love and cherish each other for eternity. The day he had so carelessly desecrated. It was the perfect symbol of their betrayal, the ultimate irony. I waited until the day before our anniversary to make my move. I wanted them to savor their happiness, to believe that they had gotten away with their deceit, right up until the very last moment. I imagined them making plans, celebrating their twisted love, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. That morning, I sent anonymous tips to both the IRS and Rachel's employer, informing them that Mark and Rachel would be together at a specific restaurant that evening, celebrating their anniversary. I knew the authorities would be waiting for them. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I spent the day pacing my apartment, replaying the events of the past few months in my head. I felt a mixture of emotions: anger, sadness, and a strange sense of satisfaction. I knew what I was doing was drastic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was necessary. They had destroyed my life, and now it was my turn to return the favor. The countdown had begun. Tomorrow, they would face the consequences of their actions. Karma was about to pay them a long overdue visit. I didn't go to the restaurant. I couldn't bear to witness their arrests firsthand. Instead, I stayed home, glued to the television, waiting for news. The local news channels were surprisingly quick to pick up the story. It started with a brief report about a prominent businessman being arrested for tax fraud. Then, a follow-up story about a high-ranking employee at a major corporation being apprehended for embezzlement. Both arrests had occurred simultaneously at a popular downtown restaurant. Though the news reports didn't explicitly name Mark and Rachel, I knew it was them. I watched the footage, my heart pounding in my chest. I saw Mark being led away in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn. I saw Rachel, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief, being escorted into a police car. The cameras flashed, capturing their shame for the world to see. A wave of satisfaction washed over me. They had betrayed me, lied to me, and destroyed my life. Now, they were finally paying the price. But as the initial rush of vindication subsided, a different set of emotions began to surface. Sadness. A deep, aching sadness for what had been lost. For the love that had turned to hate, for the trust that had been shattered beyond repair, for the family that had been torn apart. I thought about the happy memories we had shared, the holidays, the birthdays, the simple moments of joy. all of it now tainted by their betrayal. And then, guilt. A nagging voice in the back of my mind whispering that maybe I had gone too far. Maybe I should have just walked away, moved on with my life, and let karma take its course. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer. But I quickly dismissed those thoughts. They had made their choices, and they had to live with the consequences. I couldn't allow their actions to define me, to consume me. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, to find happiness again. As the news reports faded, I sat alone in my apartment, the silence broken only by the ticking of the clock. The arrests had been executed perfectly, just as I had planned. But the victory felt hollow, incomplete. The pain was still there, lurking beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the betrayal I had suffered. The road to healing would be long and difficult, but I was determined to walk it. I owed it to myself to find peace, to find forgiveness, to find a new beginning. The aftermath was chaotic. My phone rang nonstop. Friends and family members, shocked and confused, wanted answers. My parents were devastated, struggling to comprehend how their 2 daughters could have fallen so far. Mark's family was equally distraught, unable to believe that he was capable of such deceit. I tried to explain, to tell them my side of the story, but words seemed inadequate. How could I convey the depth of their betrayal, the pain that had driven me to seek revenge? Some were supportive, understanding my anger and validating my actions. Others were critical, questioning my methods and suggesting that I should have taken the high road. The hardest conversations were with my parents. They couldn't understand how Rachel could have done this to me, to them. They had always believed in the unbreakable bond between twins. Now, that bond was shattered, replaced by bitterness and resentment. I also had to deal with the legal ramifications. I was interviewed by the IRS and the police, providing them with all the evidence I had gathered. I cooperated fully with their investigations, determined to see justice served. As the dust settled, I had time to reflect on what I had done. Had my revenge been worth it? Had I achieved anything other than causing more pain and suffering? I looked back at the past few months, at the anger and bitterness that had consumed me. I had become a different person, driven by a thirst for vengeance. I questioned whether I had made the right choices. Perhaps I should have forgiven them, or at least tried to move on without resorting to such drastic measures. But then I remembered the pain, the humiliation, the feeling of being utterly betrayed. And I knew that I couldn't have done anything differently. I had done what I had to do to protect myself, to reclaim my life. The truth was, there were no winners in this situation. Everyone had lost something. Mark and Rachel had lost their freedom and their reputations. My family had lost their sense of peace and stability. And I had lost my innocence, my trust in others, and a part of myself that I would never get back. The scars of their betrayal would remain, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of even the closest relationships. The months that followed were dedicated to healing and self-discovery. I started therapy, talking through my emotions, confronting my anger, and learning to forgive myself for the choices I had made. I realized that holding on to the bitterness would only poison my own soul. I also focused on rediscovering my passions. I threw myself into my teaching, finding joy in shaping young minds and making a positive impact on their lives. I joined a hiking group, exploring the natural beauty of the mountains and finding solace in the tranquility of nature. I reconnected with old friends, rebuilding relationships that had been neglected during my marriage. I learned to be alone, to enjoy my own company, to find strength in my independence. I realized that I didn't need a man to define me, to complete me. I was whole on my own. As time passed, the pain began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace and acceptance. I realized that what Mark and Rachel had done was not a reflection of my worth, but a reflection of their own flawed characters. I refused to let their actions define me. I started to dream again, to envision a future filled with happiness and fulfillment. I enrolled in a creative writing class, rekindling my childhood passion for storytelling. I started traveling, exploring new cultures and broadening my horizons. One day, while visiting a small bookstore in a quaint mountain town, I met a kind and gentle man named David. He was a writer, a soulmate, a kindred spirit. We connected instantly, sharing our stories, our dreams, and our vulnerabilities. He saw me for who I was, scars and all, and loved me unconditionally. With David, I found a love that was based on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. A love that was built on a foundation of self-acceptance and forgiveness. A love that was stronger than any betrayal, any pain, any darkness. My journey had been long and difficult, filled with heartbreak and pain. But I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. I had learned that even in the darkest of times, hope can still bloom. And that even after the most devastating betrayal, a new beginning is always possible. Karma may have hit them hard, but it taught me an even harder lesson: the power of forgiveness and the importance of self-love. My life was far from perfect, but it was mine. And I was finally ready to embrace it, with all its imperfections and possibilities.